to click through. And I've got the pleasure of introducing Eileen Drennen. Excuse me. Eileen is an award-winning writer and editor who worked in the newspaper industry for 27 years. She has an MA in creative writing from Queens in Charlotte, North Carolina, and she's taught critical writing at the college level. Eileen has presented at national adoption-related conferences on topics related to her memoir-in-progress, which is tentatively titled Once Removed. Her writing has appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Oprah magazine, and Rumpus. And one of her essays was nominated for a Pushcart Prize, and another is forthcoming in an anthology of essays. And with that, I give you Eileen.
Thank you so much, Betsy. I'm so happy to see so many names and loved faces here with me tonight. I am going to be talking to you about what I call the long shadow of relinquishment. And I'm also going to be talking to you about some of the ways that I have found light in what many of us who are here tonight know can be a very dark place. So before I start talking about that, let me give you the Cliff Notes version of my story, how I became a birth mother. So I am one of those people who fell in love in 8th grade when I was 14 years old with a fellow classmate at St. Mary's Catholic School in Poughkeepsie, New York. And in my book, I call him Joe. And he is the only person I dated through high school. So we dated, obviously, the summer after 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. For my 16th birthday, he gave me a little diamond chip in a gold ring that's called a pre-engagement ring. They were big in the 70s. I don't know if anybody had that junior step to actually getting engaged, but it was a big deal, and I took it very seriously. And growing up in a kind of chaotic family atmosphere with a dad who had a kind of hair trigger temper, wonderful guy, college professor, mom was a college professor, and a mom who was sick, being able to find somebody who pretty much thought I hung the moon all the time was a big deal in my life. So I say all that to kind of prepare you for the wrong turns that lay ahead. When you fall in love with somebody in 8th grade. So after I got that pre-engagement ring for my 16th birthday, we still waited a couple of months to go all the way. And it wasn't until the following year, 1973, a couple of months after Roe v. Wade became the law, that I discovered I was pregnant. Actually, my mother is the one who brought up the topic one day when I was in the kitchen home from school and looking, as my mom used to say all the time with her hand on your face, a little peaked. And she asked me if there was any way I could be pregnant. And I had to say, yeah, there was. My parents were great about it because they had Joe over and we sat in the living room and talked about what we could do, which, having talked to many friends who were in similar situations, is not what everybody got from their parents. So my dad was saying, it's legal now. And given your age, I think maybe getting an abortion might be the thing to do. And my mom said, or you could live on the 3rd floor of our house and we could help you take care of the baby and you could finish high school. And of course, as soon as my mother said that, I was moving furniture around in my head because I'd seen Joe's bedroom furniture and I'm thinking, how's that going to fit up the stairs? I mean, one of the things I'm going to talk about tonight is how my imagination sort of got me into trouble because I could see this future that we were planning more real, more 3D than the actual life I was living. Now, if you're going to write books, that's probably not a bad thing, but it's not always helpful if what you're dreaming of and imagining is more real than the life that you're living. So Joe went back to talk to his parents. He said he needed to talk with his parents and he would come back and get me. And when he came back, he said his parents told him that wasn't the life they imagined for their son. And so he wanted us to get the abortion. I am 1,000% pro-choice, but I didn't want to get an abortion. I wanted to get married early, and I wanted to have a baby with this guy who I imagined as my future husband. But that's not what happened. And I got on the pill, and in November of the same year, I was pregnant again and had another abortion. We went through the same conversation with the same outcome. So by then, our parents forbade us to see one another. And it wasn't until after we both graduated high school and he went off to college in upstate New York, and I followed shortly to Buffalo, not far away, that we started hanging out together again. We would break up and get back together and break up and get back together. And in the fall of 1975, when I was 19 years old, I got pregnant for the third time by Joe. And this time I didn't tell anybody. This time I vowed that I wasn't going to tell anybody that I was pregnant until I was 4 months along, which I imagined would render me free from being talked out of carrying this baby to term. I thought all I have to do is get to 9 months and I'm home free and I'm going to be a mom. So, of course, I had no idea what I didn't know. So I made up a story to my parents about wanting to drop out of school and travel. And I really contacted my sister, who was living in San Diego, California. She was in the Navy, and asked her if I could come visit without telling her why. And I got out to California. Back in those days, we had something called ride boards, and you would go look at the ride board in the student union and see if anybody had a index card for a place you wanted to visit. And that's how I got out to California, through rides on the ride board. And when I finally told my sister that I was pregnant, and I told Joe and I told my parents didn't immediately say, you should put your child up for adoption. My parents were just devastated. And I learned afterwards that my dad went into the living room and took my senior picture off one of the tables in the living room and put it in a closet. And my mother rescued it a little bit after. So then my sister and I planned for the birth of my child, and we moved into a bigger place, and she found a place in Ocean Beach, California, part of San Diego, that was about a block from the water. We needed a roommate, so of course we were all pooling our resources, and we took Lamaze classes together. She was my coach, and bought clothes here and there. My friends from college gave me a shower when I went back east to visit my family. So I thought it was really going to happen. And then a couple of days before my due date in June of 1976, I went to the clinic that was attached to the hospital in San Diego where I went. And the nurse was concerned at the level of my blood pressure, how swollen my feet were. She was concerned about preeclampsia. They took blood and tested my urine and all that stuff. And then they admitted me for bed rest, which meant that I was alone in the hospital, a Catholic hospital, for several days without my sister, who was in the Navy and worked another job as a waitress. And this is 1976. There's no cell phones. Obviously, I called my parents and told them where I was. And that's when the conversation about adoption came up. My mother, I learned later, going through my mom's journals after my parents died, that it had been a fight between them from the start. That my mother had been saying, we need to pressure her to relinquish this child. And my father had been saying, you can't do that. You can't tell her what to do. Anyway, so my mother said, just promise me you'll talk to a social worker and ask her about adoption. So I did, without knowing that if you're 19 years old and you're on welfare and you're not married and it's a Catholic hospital and you start talking to a social worker about adoption, things are going to proceed in a way that you don't understand. So I relinquished my son when he was a week old, and I will fast forward just to say 21 years later, I searched him and found for him. And 4 months after he turned 21, and I wrote him a letter at college, and I told him who I was and said if he wanted to be in touch, I would love that, but it was his call. And he called me, and we haven't stopped talking since. So a lot of people outside of the world of people who know about adoption would say, wow, you have a happy ending. Because I got to go to his wedding and I got to go to his medical school graduation, and I've gotten to be part of his children's lives since they were born. My grandsons are now 15 and 17. But those of us who know more about what happens after you relinquish a child for adoption or what it feels like to grow up adopted know that nothing is ever that easy, right? So I want to read you the prologue for my book. It's very short. The first time I met my son as an adult was in April 1998 at the Los Angeles airport. We'd been talking by phone since October, and I'd seen a few photos from his high school yearbook. But I hadn't seen the boy I'd named Daniel, the only child I ever had, since he was a week old. On the plane, I checked my makeup and hair, made sure I had a tissue in my pocket, prayed to be present and for my racing heart to calm. I breathed in and breathed out. I ate a mint. I took my time getting off the plane. Back then, people could still meet you at the gate, so I wanted to have a few passengers in front of me as I scanned the crowd for the young man who was my son. I saw them 50 feet or so ahead, my 21-year-old's dark hair and broad shoulders, and his girlfriend's short blonde hair and tan arms. They were watching each middle-aged woman who got off before me. That could be her, I thought they were saying. I walked slowly toward them. The man who'd grown up as Jeff turned and saw me. I dropped my backpack. We hugged, and my body felt like its missing limb had been returned. My universe of molecules relaxing for the first time in decades. Then the awful realization hit me. Now that I held my boy in my arms again, I never wanted to let go. Time collapsed and reassembled, a Mobius strip of past and present. How long had we stood there embracing? Seconds? A full minute? Are you okay? Jeff asked, mid-hug. I took a deep breath, willed myself not to cry, and spoke into his hair. I think I am, I said. Now, I think I am. I believed I was as he introduced me to his sweet-eyed girlfriend, as we corralled my suitcase, as we walked out into the parking deck toward his Jeep. But how could one hug erase our 21-year separation? Our mother-son relationship was legally severed in 1976 by the County of San Diego. He'd been raised by a family he loved. I'd made a life without him. You can't just put back together what adoption has so surgically broken apart. But that didn't mean we wouldn't try. The reason I use the phrase the long shadow of relinquishment is because it's affected every relationship in my life, not just my relationship with my son or myself or my family, but my relationship with coworkers, my relationship with other women friends, my relationship with strangers, my relationship with neighbors. Relinquishment by severing us from our, for me, first and only child. I think when I wrote, it felt like I had a limb return. That's true. But there's also part of having relinquished a child for adoption that means there's like some limb always missing. Like we're back in each other's lives. I got to hug him, but it can never go back to what it was. So there's a sense of many people in adoption who write about it talk about the ghost kingdom and the ghost family and the ghost kid. So that's part of it. There's a something deep missing in every moment. It doesn't always feel heavy, but it's always kind of there. Um, I know some of you know exactly what I'm talking about, and I'll try and be more precise. I didn't know that relinquishment had a long shadow for many, many years because I didn't really think about grieving. When I lost my son, I had just turned 20, and it was 1976. And um, nobody in my family or my circle of friends knew what to say to me or what to do. Nobody suggested I see a therapist or a counselor. We never talked about what happened. Um, I did what many people do in my circumstances. I pushed it way down inside. I always thought about it as the deep freeze of my psyche. I've heard people talk about putting their grief in the furthest back of the closet in their mind. Many metaphors will work, but the fact is, in order to survive, you can't have it in the front of your mind, or else I say, or else you can't get out of bed, but I'm making that up because I put it away. I put it away so I could go to the community college and register, so I could start back all over in college. At 20 years old, I started out as a freshman at the community college, so I could do it better. Um, the only thing that motivated me then was trying to become somebody that my son could be proud of. And I just kept moving forward. I had a part-time job. I worked 20 hours a week. I had a full load at the community college. My second semester in, I asked if I could, I asked what happened to the literary magazine. I mean, if I'm paying attention in class and I'm really pouring myself into school, why don't I find out about the literary magazine? And I was told, well, we don't have it anymore. And I said, could I start it back up? And they said yes. So I threw myself into a life that was about achievement and accomplishment. After college, I got a job in a newspaper, and newspapers became that for me. This place where I could work really long hours, work hard long hours, doing something I loved, something creative, and not think about my grief. Just pretend it wasn't there. Um, I think of the girl I was as having split into two people. And the girl that everybody saw, who went to class, who had a job, who was successful in her part-time job at a Kmart, who did well in school, who seemed to be going on with her life, was only half of me. And I didn't know who the other half was for a long, long time. I found her in the process of writing my book. I call her the girl in the well. And if we have enough time, I'll read you a little bit about the girl in the well. But now I think of her as the person who was actively grieving. She couldn't be around me. She had to be in the deep freeze, but she still existed in me. I just didn't have access to her. The only time she appeared is if I had too much to drink. I started crying. And one of my friends would say, "What's the matter?" And I would tell them. Or if one of my friends or relatives had a baby and put the baby in my arms. Um, or if I wasn't expecting to see something that would get me and I found a mom and her child, or um, a couple together with their baby, then it would hit me and I would have to just find a bathroom to duck into, or um, turn my face away and just deal with it a little bit and then shove it back in the closet. That was how I got through. Um, it took me 24 years to actually seek therapy. And it wasn't because I was ready to deal with this grief. It was because I was 3 years into my reunion with my son, and I couldn't figure out why I wasn't happy. I mean, I had the fairy tale. We were reconnected. We visited. I got to see him, and I was miserable. I thought there must be something wrong with me. So the first therapist I saw, so I was 44 years old. This is the year 2000. Um, she couldn't begin to help me with the deep, deep grief that I had, but she could educate me about what I had been through. She could tell me that my feelings made sense. She could tell me that what had happened to me was outside the usual order of things for a woman and her baby. So she helped me make sense enough that I could kind of start acknowledging the sorrow. Um, I've talked to many other women who are birth mothers who've said something that I felt back then. I thought, I have a job. I can't afford to cry because if I let myself start to cry, I'll never stop. And then I'll drown, and then I'll be dead, and then I won't get a paycheck. So I did not know how to grieve in a healthy way. Um, Fortunately, this therapist got me started on a path of healing, and she helped me understand the dynamics of reunion that I hadn't read or hadn't heard from my friends in the support group. And that was a real benefit to me. Um, it would take me another 10 years of the wonderful roller coaster of reunion for me to find a therapist who was ready, and I suppose I was ready then. I had taken a buyout from my newspaper job. Um, I was ready to try and access the grief that was trapped inside me. She's the person who taught me about stuck grief. I know that the grief of relinquishment has been called complicated, and there's another word for it that's escaping my mind right now. I know it's not regular grief. I mean, I've lost a cat. She was 18 years old. I missed her. I grieved her. And then I wasn't sad anymore. This grief, this postponed grief, this delayed grief was a particularly tough nut for me to crack because, as I say, I purposely kept myself so busy. And my job helped me keep myself so busy. So she was the first person who told me that my grief lived in my body. I had never heard that before. Um, she asked me one time what it felt like. She had this wonderful office out in, um, I guess it was Decatur, not far from my office. She had this wonderful office where she had a window that looked out into the trees and the sky, and I would just sit there. And I did learn to schedule my appointments for a time when I could go home after therapy instead of having to go back into the office. Because going back into the office after crying as hard as I cried in her office was really hard. So she helped me see that if something was stuck inside of me, I couldn't think it away. I couldn't write it away in my journal. I would have to actually move it. Um, I have seen in movies, people who are angry punch the pillows or they scream or they do things to move it through them. She gave me this exercise with eggs, fresh eggs, and she said, go out into nature and find someplace safe to bang these eggs on the ground. And as you throw the eggs so that you're using your whole body, you should draw the faces of the people who hurt you or who let you down into your mind's eye. And as you throw the egg, you should say, how could you? And then say exactly what they did. How dare you? And of course, being a professional overthinker, I started to worry about wasting food. And I started to worry about, well, why would I throw eggs at trees? I love trees. I mean, that does, anyway. It took me months. And also, how can I scream at the top of my lungs without terrifying my neighbors? It took me months to figure out how to do this assignment. But it was so interesting to me how I felt different afterwards. I did everything that she said. I screamed, I busted legs, and I was hoarse, but I felt that I had more room in my chest for the first time in my life. It was crazy. I immediately thought, the next time I need to do this, I'm not getting a dozen, I'm getting 18. So I share that advice with anybody who's telling me they don't know how to get the grief out of their body. Try the egg treatment. I mean, obviously, you can use a rubber ball or something and bang it against a cement wall someplace you can scream. But there is really something about busting an egg that I thought was very, very helpful. Um, she also helped me get creative with my therapy. She didn't sit there and tell me what was what. She engaged me in um, unpacking my own story. So she suggested you can go back in time like a reporter and you can see what happened to you. And you can, if you can't figure out the details, you can use your imagination to help you find some story that makes sense to you. And that was essential to helping me with my book. So, the first thing I want to share with you is that whether you are a writer or you like to write or you've ever written before, writing can help you with grief. I was just reading the other day about a guy whose last name is Pennebaker. I found an article in Psychology Today. I forget the first initials, but he did these experiments in a lab where he had people who had had something hard happen to them write 3 times a week for 5 minutes at a time and just write about the event, write it over and over again, write it over and over again. Then he had other people write about nothing. And the people who wrote about something hard that happened to them and wrote it over and over again, they could measure the changes, the physiological changes in their bodies, and they could hear from them that something was happening to them because they were writing. This isn't writing for publication, this is writing as a therapeutic tool. I thought that was so interesting. I learned that writing in a journal was one way to get off a bunch of steam, and writing for publication is a whole different thing. But writing is the through line, moving your hand, saying the same thing over and over again until you see something change in you. Um, the other thing that I learned about writing was it wasn't enough to say I lost my son to adoption. I had to identify in very granular detail everything I lost. So I lost every milestone in my son's life. I lost being the person who got to hear his first word. I lost watching him take his first step. The more specific I could be with what I lost, the easier it felt to grieve it for me. I've also just recently, and this is years after I started this process, been grieving the fact that I was never able to announce a pregnancy with joy. That's a loss. What doing that kind of writing and adding detail to my grief has done for me is it's helped me be um, more skilled when those things that I talked about come out of the blue. When somebody puts a new baby into my arm, or when I see a mom and a kid, I will still get sad, but I immediately know what to do. I go someplace quiet, I cry, I stretch, and I put on some music to make me feel better, or I go for a walk. So what I've heard from therapists is that's exactly what you're supposed to do. Something happens, you know how to take care of it, you're good. But I had to learn how to do that over time. Um, Other thing I wanted to talk about, I'm going past another piece of my book to read because I want to make sure I hit all my points here. The other thing I learned is there's no end date on the grief of traumatic loss. Um, it never stops hurting. It becomes easier to carry. It's no longer frozen inside me. It feels like it flows. Um, the way love flows. I see the connection between love and grief, and I accept them as forces in my life that I live with. It's not stuck, it's in flow now because of the work that I've been doing. Um, the other thing that has helped me so much find light is connecting with those in the same boat. Um, it's the best medicine that I've found for the kind of grief that women who've lost their children to adoption and people who've lost their first parents to adoption can do, whether it's a support group, whether it's friendships that you've made in the groups that you go to, like Adoption Network Cleveland, Concerned United Birth Parents. We just had a retreat in Atlanta, and we all say the same thing every time we see each other. This is the best medicine, because we finally feel normal. We don't feel like we're outside of human experience. We've shared the same experiences, and we can even joke about it because we feel safe. And this is despite the fact that so many people in the rest of our lives still see adoption as, I hear it called the puppies and rainbow story, or that it's a total positive all the time, that it's win-win for everybody. We who've lived it know better, so we can even find ways to use gallows humor. Some of my dearest friends of my life I met in my first support group in Atlanta more than 30 years ago. And the kind of gallows humor that we use with each other is we say, you know, if we had to go through something so awful, at least we found each other. So there's a gift in that. The other ways that I've found light is I've been willing to try anything that might help. Therapy is wonderful. Writing therapy is wonderful. But I have seen shaman. I have gotten special massages. I've talked to mediums. I've had my chart done. I have tried different mindfulness practices. I have tried plant medicine. I have tried anything that I heard about that might help. And I can't tell you which has made the biggest difference, but I think a willingness to try anything is what has helped. That's not true. I would say writing has made the biggest difference, but every single thing I just mentioned has supported the writing. I mentioned that I love the idea of string theory and the multiverse. And when I first heard about multiverses, that physics guys think that because of the way certain substances respond, I'm not a physics major, I'm an English major, so bear with me, that it's possible that things can be happening in the same time in different places. And I took that as an invitation to let my imagination help me, which is to say, I can't change the facts of what happened. I can't change that I lost my son, but I can change how I feel about it and how I hold it. And the way I did that specifically with relinquishment is I said, okay, well, what if there's another universe where I got to keep my son? What would that look like? And just as I wanted to grieve the details of what I lost, I wanted to inhabit the details of what I didn't get. So I said, okay, let's just dream it up. What does it look like? And I wrote it down in my journal, 5 pages long. What surprised me about it, because of course I said, well, there's got to be a universe where we didn't lose each other. There's got to be a universe where we were never parted. And as I kept writing, I was surprised that I didn't want him not to have his adopted parents. I wanted him to still have the parents who raised him. And because it's my imagination, I can do whatever I want. So the way I handled it was I said, oh, these were the people who were going to adopt him, but the adoption didn't go through. But we liked each other so much, I made them his godparents. And then we were all friends. And then they helped me with babysitting. And then we kind of became a big family together. And then as he got older, they got more involved in his life because of their connections and who they knew. And then he went into high school and made other friends, and his world expanded. And it was just so interesting to me that I hadn't wanted to remove their presence in his life. I wanted to remove my absence. I wanted to remove his absence from my life. But I would never have even tried that exercise if I hadn't learned about string theory and the multiverses, that anything can be happening in another universe, even if I can't see it. I think we have a little bit of time, and instead of reading you the excerpt I was going to read you, I'd like to read you something else called The Girl in the Well. I want to read you this because I said at the beginning of this conversation, my imagination got me into so much trouble because the future I could see was more real than my life. I bet everything on the future that didn't happen. Healing what happened, my imagination has helped. And the way my imagination has helped is I decided I wanted to find all the girls I was. I wanted to find them individually. You've heard me say several times, I like detail. I want to know granular. Who's my 10-year-old? Who's my 12-year-old? I guess this is kind of family systems, but I haven't been through that. This is just me and my imagination. So the hardest girl for me to find, as I went back and found all the girls I was the girl who relinquished. And I call her the girl in the well. July 2023, Wisconsin. The sun was low and lemony when Terry and I pulled into a crowded restaurant parking lot by the Fox River in Oshkosh. Starved from the long day's drive from furthest north Wisconsin, we unfolded ourselves from the car to relax over dinner before crashing at the hotel. My mind was hopping with ideas about how to make my hard story stronger, thanks to a week-long writing class at Madeline Island. My body, on the other hand, dragged from the all the way tired I get when holding my story seems overwhelming. For days, I'd been discussing my deepest losses as if they'd happened to someone else. Staying objective about sentences on a page is an exercise in creative remove. Terry and I followed the host out to a picnic table with an umbrella. Once seated, we had a view of the river as the day inched towards sundown. The air rang with guitar and singing before we spotted the source, a curly guy in his 30s doing originals and songs that were hits when I was a teen. He paid special attention to a table nearest the stage, next to which a dark-haired woman in a sundress stood, rocking her baby. When she wasn't watching the stage intently, she chatted with her table mates or repositioned the child in her arms. Eventually, we realized they were a family, the baby 6 or 8 months old. The rocking back and forth wife stayed in my line of sight as I ate, her rhythmic sway familiar to anyone who's ever raised a child or cared for someone else's, the universal two-step I think of as the baby sway. Envy is an emotion I work to banish, but on that night I failed. What might it have felt like, I let myself wonder, to have a baby with a husband who adored you? The idea pinballed from my mind to my body, where it unleashed a hot wave of grief and its familiar drumbeat. Why was I so easy to leave? What about me wasn't good enough to marry, to claim, to keep? And then I couldn't finish dinner. My face grew hot. I put down my fork, drank water, wine heavy in my throat, pushed tears back, forced myself to stay, though I couldn't find the words to explain to my husband what had just happened. For so long, I'd been afraid to feel the icy pain of the pregnant teen I was, who had been abandoned by the father of her child, a man she still loved. And there I was finally, when I least expected it, sinking into the well of her sorrow. Abandoned. Even the word sounds bare, a granite outcropping without trees, open to all weather. Unprotected. A vacant building once filled with life, then left behind. Holding the word in my mouth made me want to curl up into a ball. The more deeply I considered all the word holds, the more clearly I saw that I had lived all sides of it. Legally and literally, I didn't lose my son to adoption, my preferred phrase, so much as abandon him into it. In having 2 abortions I didn't want, I abandoned myself to keep Joe, who abandoned us both. I stared out the window the whole ride to the hotel, then brushed my teeth and took an antihistamine to make sure I slept hard. The next morning, I felt rested enough to fill Terry in about the previous night's question, which was still burning inside. "You aren't easy to leave," Terry said, taking me in his arms. "It wasn't you. It was him who left. That's about him, not you." I heard his words and understood their meaning, but struggled to see the distinction. When we got home, I made a Zoom date with my therapist and wept out the whole story. "Talk to her," she said. "The girl inside asking that question. Ask her what she needs." The only way to access my inner teen mom, who I'd cast aside so many years ago, is by writing to her in the pages of my journal. I wrote her a letter, addressing her tenderly to ask where she was inside me and what she needed. Slowly, a picture emerged. She was at the bottom of a stone well, curled in upon herself, weeping. I reached my hand down until I could grasp hers and pulled her sweet, damp self into my arms, and I talked to her. "My poor sweet girl, I'm so sorry I left you behind all those years ago. Your tears and bottomless sorrow were too heavy to bear. I had to find some way to walk into the next day and make a life that wasn't the one we dreamed. I had to find a way to become someone our baby could be proud of. Can you forgive me?" I wiped her tears. I stroked her hair. I pulled her into my heart, and I thanked her for carrying our grief for so long and promised I'd never leave her again. Thank you.
So powerful. Thank you, Eileen. Wow, really moving.
Thank
I can't wait to see your book.
you. I can't wait to give it to you.
But before I do want to ask you more about the process of the book, but before we even go there, several questions about relationships, if you choose to answer them.
Yep.
So one is, what happened to Joe? How did he react to the pregnancy? Tell us a little bit more about that if you are open to it.
Yeah. Joe died in 2022 before he and Jeff had a chance to meet.
Mm,
They were in contact by text and telephone. Joe had never told the three children that he and his wife had and raised about their oldest brother. He was very ashamed of the way he had acted by leaving us in California, and he couldn't forgive himself. I told him I forgave him, but he couldn't forgive himself. Um, I'm grateful that I stayed in touch with Joe all the years. We would run into each other at high school reunions. He met my husband, and all we did was text. But because I was writing this book for so long and I had so many questions of things I couldn't remember, finally, the year before he died, he answered some questions that helped me understand what had happened to us as teens that he'd never told me before. So um, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for all of that, but I am sad that they didn't get to meet.
thank you. Um, and someone else asked about, you mentioned kind of briefly that this loss impacted all of your relationships, and they wanted to hear, she said it resonated with her and she wanted to hear more about that.
Um, I worked in newspapers for many years, and um, sometimes people would say, well, you do a lot of mothering in the newsroom, and and I guess that's okay, but sometimes it's not okay. I do have this intense need to mother, and that's why I have 3 cats, and that's probably where it should go. It probably shouldn't go out into the world unless somebody asks me for it. But what I mean is, in all my relationships, I still struggle with the sense of being outside of normal society. The shame that I felt, um, I have recognized that it's not mine. I refuse to be ashamed of the girl I was. I refuse to be ashamed of someone who believed in what wasn't true. But for most of my life, I took that shame personally and I carried it into every relationship. I felt less than. I felt like I wasn't worthy of regular people. So it took me a long time to put that down. I was fortunate enough to work with somebody in a newspaper who had stripped in college, and he wrote a book about it, a lovely guy. And one time I said, "Aren't you embarrassed to write about what you did in college?" And he just looked at me and he said, "Ain't no shame in my game." And the phrase reverberated in my head, and I'm like, I want what he has. I want no shame in my game. I want to put it down. But it took years for me to figure out how to do that.
And then one more relationship question. It was asked about your son's adoptive parents and how they reacted to the reunion. It sounds like maybe you've had some contact with them.
Yeah, they have been very supportive, and I think they were genuinely happy for us that we reconnected. I think they could see how alike in some ways we were. But I think for many people who became adopted parents in the 70s, I think there wasn't as much education about what adopted parents might expect, both for their children and for any original family that might show up in later years. And so I think it might be hard to understand why I keep showing up. And for my part, um, I I thought at the beginning of my reunion that I was just like getting my son back, and it took me a long time to realize that wasn't possible, sweetheart. I had some illusions that I'm sure were probably kind of hard to bear if you were around me. So I think they were extremely gracious and they've been very kind to me. So um, one of the things that I heard at the Cub Retreat last week that really stuck with me was how important it is for every single side of the triad to get therapy. I don't think that's talked about. We seem to be the most broken, so we're quick to get therapy, and a lot of adoptees feel like therapy is helpful. But I don't know how many adopted parents think that maybe it's something that they should consider too. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but just to learn more about what reunion really is. I don't think it's understood, really. So that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Um, well, we were talking right before the program started. You were mentioning a book about grieving that sounded so good. I'd like you to mention it, and we'll make
Yes,
sure that we send it out in the follow-up email
I
too.
should definitely be getting some of that man's royalties because I am pushing this book as hard as if I wrote it myself. This book is called Find the Words, and I am recommending it to everybody I know who has any grief that they're struggling with. The author's name is Colin Campbell. He he and his wife lost their teenage children who were in the back seat of the car because a drunk driver T-boned them, and the two kids in the back seat were killed instantly, and the parents were not really harmed physically. And he had to figure out how to live. He said he called the book Find the Words because he couldn't believe how many people came up and said to him, "There are no words." He's like, "Do better. Um, find the words." And I was telling Betsy that, all of us in this community know that most people's grief IQ is very low. They don't really understand grief. They don't have any idea what we're talking about when we talk about complicated and lasting grief. And he does a great job describing how he educates everybody in his life. Before he and his wife went back to work, they wrote their colleagues a letter and said, "Here's what we've been through. Here's what we need from you. Here's what we can't bear. If your religion tells you that our kids are in a better place and it happened for a reason, please don't speak with us. We can't handle that." Um, they told their families what they needed before they came home for Thanksgiving. And every year they have an event where they celebrate their kids' memories. And they are constantly hearing new stories about their kids, which keep their kids alive. So I find it inspiring and it's super helpful. So
Thank you. There's someone else on the Zoom that is reading it right now as well.
Oh, yay,
So
Leslie. Leslie
fantastic. And
says,
actually, I already bought it for somebody else. So
yay,
that book's going to get lots of sales here. So,
here is done.
if anybody else has any questions, we probably have time for one more or so. But Eileen, if you could talk a little bit about the publishing process. I know you talk powerfully about how writing has been so healing, and I know that your book is going to come out and have a life of its own. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was telling Betsy it's a lot longer of a process. Oh, somebody wants to know, did I try to have more children? Not until I was 41. And then I thought, Joan, not until I was 41. And then I thought, I was raised Catholic, Joan. And then I thought if God wanted me to have children, God would give me children. So I didn't let myself do IVF or anything that would increase my chances, because part of me thought I didn't deserve to have children because I did such a poor job the first time around. So, but I have a wonderful stepson, and I am so grateful for that man because he just lets me be as affectionate and wild as I am, and he seems to like it. So I'm a lucky girl. The path to publishing is probably longer than most people think, unless you're going to publish it yourself, which I'm not choosing to do immediately. I am trying to find an agent, and I have many friends who are further along on their publishing journeys than I am, who've been very generous with suggesting names, and some of the people who are here with us tonight have taken book proposal workshops with me. I have a book proposal that I need to redo. So I'm gonna get into that great big contest that some of my other friends have done, where you send a lot of queries out into the world and hope that somebody says, that sounds like just what I'm looking for. We'll be happy to publish it. If that doesn't happen through an agent, I will try indie booksellers and university presses. And as a last resort, if nobody's interested, I'll publish it myself. But I'm going to try traditional publishing first and see how it goes.
Thank you. I can tell it's going to be a beautiful book from the parts that you read.
Thank you so much. That means a lot
So
to me.
I'm going to go ahead and post a couple links of some things that we have coming up. I'm going to start here with a link to a quick survey of your thoughts about our program this evening. And if you have specific ideas of other speakers that you'd like us to have, there's a place on the survey to let us know that as well. So please take a minute. Does anybody have a last question before I start wrapping up here? Lots of praise for you, Eileen.
I know I'm trying to heart everybody.
um, so Adoption Network does have support meetings, as Eileen mentioned, and other organizations do as well. I will put a link to where you can find out more about our support meetings. This is the one that's general meeting, open to everyone. We also have a birth mother specific support group, and a transnational adoptee support group, and a DNA discovery group. So you can find them all on that calendar. We do have several interesting topics coming up in November. Monday, November 3rd, which I guess is already next week. Jim Graham is joining us about his new book called Buried Truth, a poignant story of a man's search for his father. He is not adopted, but grew up in a family that he was not related to. I guess kind of a spoiler alert, but his father was a priest, and he went through a whole process. So if that's interesting, please join us next Monday. His book is amazing. I just finished it. Monday, November 10th, we're having an adoptee, Kim Dykes, just looking at healing yoga for grief and loss. She's a yoga teacher and a reunited adoptee. And then on Monday, November 17th, we have Beth Jaffe talking about her private adoption story. When a private adoption story becomes a public reckoning, she's also a birth mother. So please join us for those, and you can find them on our website. Thank you for being here this evening. We are a membership organization. You can also find membership information on our website if you'd like to support our work. So thank you very much for being here this evening.